Okay, we're on the episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff to have a really cool kind of product preview for you guys from the brand HVD, or Hand Wound Vintage Design. They're a Singapore-based brand that is actually a sister company to RZE. Now, HVD combines hand-wound mechanical movements with super vintage styling to produce well-crafted, vintage-inspired timepieces at an affordable price point. In terms of the type of watch, this kind of falls within two categories. The first one being a chronograph. Some key common characteristics in sign language, you're looking for a chrono. Of course, you're going to want external pushers to activate timing functions with multiple subdials to measure elapsed time, often featuring additional scales dependent on the subgenre of the watch itself, which in this case would be as a dive watch. Some key characteristics and design language there. Of course, water resistance, typically with some type of screw down crown. You want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a dive extension is nice if on bracelet. This is their SpectreDiver chronograph in the black colorway, and it's of course a vintage inspired chrono. This is going to be coming to Kickstarter in March, and probably by the time this posts, it will already be live on Kickstarter. It should be live on the 21st of 2024, March, and they'll be available for $3.99 on pre-order before eventually rising up to a $4.99 retail price. And I have to say, I'm pretty excited about this one. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so you guys know I enjoy chronographs, I enjoy divers, but diving chronographs, they're tough. There's only been a small handful that have really resonated with me, and I have to say this one definitely adds to that list because I think they just do a lot well, especially at the price point, right? You know, I don't think this is going to be anybody's one watch in their collection, so it is nice to have something like this at a more accessible price point, even at full price, just under $500. Now, in terms of the dimensions, 39 millimeters at the case, 40 millimeters across the bezel, 15 millimeters thick. And you know, that might sound thick and it might even look thick on camera, but honestly 15 millimeters isn't that thick, especially considering the fact that this is a chronograph and a diver. So you know, there's going to be a certain level of robustness that's going to be there due to water resistance, as well as due to the fact that, you know, you're going to have more complications in there, right? It's going to make the movement generally thicker. So 15 millimeters isn't too shabby. Now, lug to lug, 47.5 millimeters, stainless steel, brushed and polished. You can see some nice high polished accents there on the case. Check out those bevels, very nice and clean. And again, this is a watch that you could potentially get for under $400 at $399 if you get in on the pre-orders. So the crystal here is a double domed Hesalite plexiglass, and yeah, it looks great, guys. One of the nice things about Hesalite and plexiglass in general is that it's going to be extremely crisp and clear, and you can see that here. Very nice, very, very legible, less reflective than something like sapphire. And yeah, this thing looks really, really clean. And I know some people are gonna say, oh well, Hesalite, that's just kind of an old thing. I'm not huge on Hesalite, but not huge on Hesalite for an expensive watch. This is not a super expensive piece, so while I would never buy a Speedmaster with a Hesalite crystal, I think a Hesalite crystal on a watch that costs $500 max is going to be completely fine. Getting to this bezel, which is nicely graduated for 12 hours, so it means you can use it for a 12-hour travel insert. So let's say, you know, you're going to go, I'm in California and I want to go, you know, a place that's 2 hours ahead, boom, 3 hours ahead, 4 hours ahead, right? So then I can always go back to my home time, and it is very useful. Something you probably noticed there was that this is bidirectional. So 60 click bidirectional rotating, and I have to say the action on here is very good. Not super audible, but very tactile. You can feel each click, and it is still quite smooth. And I think the 60 click was definitely the right way to go, because it's not like you're going to be timing the, and well, one, the action's nice regardless of how many clicks there are, but I think the 60 click on a bidirectional just makes a lot of sense, so that it makes it a little bit easier to maybe track in, hey, if you were to travel to one of the few places that might be off by 30 minutes versus a full hour, you could do that as well. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, ooh. Yeah, so very nice bidirectional aluminum insert, 12-hour travel, and you still do get that 12 o'clock pip for timing purposes if you did want to, use it more at a dive scale capacity. Now, the crown, this is of course a hand wound watch, so the crown is going to be push pull, and that's one of those things that might have people a little worried. Push pull crown on a watch that's supposed to be a diver. Well, again, this one, although it has that diver aesthetic and everything, it's not advertising more than 50 meters of water resistance. So not hugely, 5 atmospheres. This is going to be more so for the aesthetic. But you don't have to be too afraid to have this one in water, or if it gets splashed, rained on, whatever, as long as you're not actuating the pushers or pulling out the crown while the watch is submerged briefly, you'll be completely fine. There's of course modern seals and everything in here, so not something you have to worry about. Now, getting to the movement, like some of you might have expected here at this price point, you're going to have a Seagull ST19 movement. You guys can see, very, very cool. We've seen these movements in cheaper watches. We've seen them in more expensive watches. But I think this is a nice little sweet spot for something like this in terms of the fact that, yeah, it's not some super high-end movement, not overly collectible. But the nice thing is if you need to replace it, you can replace it. And I mean, honestly, if you need to replace the watch, you can replace the watch without too much heartache, right? I mean, still, if you get it for $399, not that that's no, inconsequential amount of money, but you're not going to be completely heartbroken if something goes wrong. Now, you're going to be getting a 50-hour power reserve, and this is going to be beating at 3 hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour in terms of its beat rate. And it's nice to see everything through that display case back. But one of the nice things here is you got a good looking watch. Check that out. Boom, boom. Very nice, very clean. This isn't some module. This is all integrated. I mean, it's not the most complex, not the most high spec, movement by any means, but it does the job. And I can appreciate that. So very smooth and, just like you would expect from a piece like this. Now, getting into this dial, it is a beautiful glossy enamel dial with polished indices and hands and old radium super luminova. So this is going to look really great in the dark. But before we get it in the dark, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really well. And yeah, I do have a slightly larger than average wrist at 7.5 inches, but as you guys can see, it's quite round. So it's not like it's flat and super accommodating. But if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens here, it's going to give you a bit of perspective distortion. It's going to make the watch head feel much larger on the wrist than it really does. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame, just so you guys can get a bit more of a truer aspect ratio as you're taking that more detailed look. One thing I did want to mention is that this does have 20mm lugs, and they are drilled, which is nice. You're getting this solid link and end-link 3-link rivet style bracelet, just the rivet style, but of course they are faux rivets that are there for looks, but you know what? It looks good, so I'm completely fine with it in this case. And again, you're not paying a ton of money for something that has faux rivets. So hey, I'm cool with it. Again, 20mm tapering down to 16mm, and you're getting this milled 18.5mm push button clasp with 3 position micro adjustment holes, and these are manual micro adjustment holes that are signed. The clasp is signed, I should say. And yeah, I think it is a good looking, well balanced piece. Check that out. Some of you who might have been a little bit worried about that kind of stout height can see that I would say the case architecture does a great job of really visually thinning that out, right? Because you do have that thinner mid case thanks to the bevels and undercuts in high polish, and then you have that kind of satin strip in the middle, and of course you do have the pushers and crown breaking up some of that, and yeah, a nice distinctive bezel there, standing nice and tall with the crystal peeking out above that, case back peeking out below, and it does help compartmentalize that visual heft, I think, well enough. So with that said, let's actually get it off the wrist, set up for some lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, really nice, right? Just like you would expect from a dive watch, or at least one with a diver's aesthetic. And yeah, it looks good, and it does have, you know, good enough water resistance, because, you know, at the end of the day, if you are going to have a chronograph diver, chances are you're going to spend more time using it more as just a chronograph, right? Because most dedicated divers are going to be more of a, you know, desk diver already. So the more useful complication there is going to be the chronograph, as well as that 12-hour traveling timing bezel there. So very cool. But one thing I always like to work in is a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. You guys can see those subdials with the concentric circle patterning looks fantastic. The dial itself, inky and dark and really high contrast, always going to be rendering as a deep inky black, which is great, versus if, let's say, if it was more matted, you might see it wash out, almost like you can see that corner of the bezel insert there. See how it washes out and becomes more of a brighter gray, anthracite gray. You're not going to get that with the dial. So I think that's pretty cool. And honestly, the way that the dial and the bezel play off of each other is actually a nice contrast, versus sometimes brands will try to make the bezel and dial match so much to where it almost feels like the dial is just really big and expansive. I think in this case, in terms of the proportions, it does help to have a bit more of a contrast on the dial versus that bezel. So very, very handsome, guys. Check this out. The warm gilt tones work really, really well here. And yeah, it's a good looking timepiece for not a lot of money. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to just run off a list of, you know, specs that make this such a monster. It's really more so the fact that it's a balanced design with a balanced spec sheet for the price. So for me, guys, closing thoughts on the wrist, nice proportions, very comfortable and balanced wear, screams vintage with a vintage kind of Omega Seamaster vibe without directly approaching homage territory, right? So it does have kind of that older big crown Seamaster before the lyre lugs and all that, like that type of silhouette. But, you know, most people wouldn't even be able to notice that or call that out. But hey, for a collector, they might see that and it might just be a fun little nod. For me, that's where it kind of rests. It's more a nice little design inspiration that does help it tie into, that era within, the cultural zeitgeist of recognizing particular little aspects and design cues, but, definitely nowhere near saying, oh, this is an Omega, Seamaster, or Speedmaster homage. Now, in terms of model variants, definitely check the links for updates and availability. I believe this also is going to have a white dial variation with some crispier modern lume and I believe blue accents, so check that out as well if that sounds interesting to you. Comparable models, for me, it's nice to see this popular movement making it into nicer and nicer watches, right? And again, I think this is still in the space where it's not overly priced or you're just like, wow, that I wish there was a better movement in there. Like, I think for $399 especially, this is a completely fine movement to have in this watch, because the case and the bracelet standards in terms of how they're produced, I think absolutely fit within that. Hey, this is an under a $500 watch. totally fine. Again, not everything can be super ultimate value. No, this isn't going to be the best watch for the least amount of money, and it's not going to be the other way around either, where it's going to be super high spec, crazy top tier, anything like that. This is going to be somewhere in the middle, and I think more of a sweet spot. So if you comparatively, I don't know how this is going to fare. It's really more so about if you like the design. I think you'll definitely be happy with what you get for the money. So for me, guys, bottom line, great vintage inspired looks that are far from being an homage, with a really well curated feature set that I think add value to this vintage inspired theme, right? By adding that 12-hour traveler's bezel. I think that was really smart. Adds another level of functionality. So if you say, hey, well, 50 meters isn't enough, water resistance, 5 atmospheres. Well, guess what? It doesn't have a dive time bezel anyway. So you can just say this is just a traveler's watch. That just, if somebody wants to argue that, I don't think people should want to. I think one of the best things about collecting timepieces is it kind of brings people together, right? So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please like, and if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.